Hello everyone and welcome to the final panel of today's trade conference. I'm very confident that this will end the day with an entertaining and informative session covering a range of publishing markets with a quickfire lightning talks panel. For anyone who works in selling translation rights, and Raymond referred to this in the earlier panel, you will know that the secret of success is to find the right person in the right publishing house, in the right country, who will love your book as much as you do, and who will want to buy the rights and publish the book in the language in which they're publishing. And this really does mean understanding the country's trends and reading habits, and understanding the publishing landscape, as well as the tastes of individual editors. So this panel is really aimed at giving a glimpse inside 5 markets. And I'm really delighted to be joined by a fantastic group of people who are each giving us an insight into their world, talking about the market for translated books across different genres. Each of our speakers will talk for 5 minutes. This really is lightning talks. I've got my stopwatch and my klaxon on hand. About what is selling well in their territory in translation and what they're looking for, or in the case of Anna, what editors are looking for in Spain. So our first speaker today is Ciccy Yuqi Shang, who is the rights manager for Phoenix Juvenile and Children's Publishing in China. So Ciccy, over to you.
Okay, hello everyone, and I'm Ciccy from Phoenix Juvenile and Children's Publishing House. We do books for children. About today's topic, what right buyers want, and I really want to talk about this topic because as a buyer, I want to share my opinions that what I want to buy, and as a seller, I really want to hear your opinions. And for nowadays, in our publishing house, we need science book. Science book is really in a great demand. We want biology, math, math or chemistry and something like that, like those, and as well as the new science about the virtual reality, augmented reality, or an artificial intelligence. Yes, we want books like that. But we used to get some like newsletters. It's a very huge book with a very thick, and it will cost. The cost will be very high. And this kind of book, even the content is very good, but for us, we're selling like 20,000. We don't make any profit, so this is not good. And I want to show you some books that we used to buy from French publisher Buoyant, if you know. It's very small. Very small books and very thin. We can give it not that much high price, and we can sell it like separately and together as a series. And it has a very good market in China right now, and we keep doing it like for 10 years till now. But now the content is a little bit old. We are thinking about to change it to some new, renew it. And we also do novels, literature novels and picture books. But if you want me to give a conclusion about what kind of picture books, is really hard to make a conclusion because we want all kinds of good. And here I want to show you some books that we buy last year. This is a series from Australia, and now and it's like the 2020's best sellers from our publishers, and it's about the animals and to show children animals stories, but to show children like how to deal with difficulties, how to make new friends, and how to do things without any help, only by themselves. And the other books is like this from Japanese. It's funny stories and with the open ending. And this kind of, I cannot make a conclusion that what can we want, but we want like it can teach you something, but not with funny stories or very cute pictures. This kind of will be sell very good in China, because nowadays, you know, it's all market oriented. And for literature, we would like it to be stories that about the locals like life about from different countries, to make Chinese children to know the other children's same age with them, what kind of life they are living, make them to think more, to know more about the children from other race. But in China, there's one problem that we don't do the literature that to show like the fantasy stories to like build a empire or dominate the whole world. This is not, you know, in accordance with Chinese education for children to build their value sense. Last year, I received a series of literature from Yuqi. I think it's about a mermaid, beautiful mermaid princess that she dominates the whole seas, and the story is really attractive. But we cannot do this kind of books because that's value sense doesn't goes in accordance with Chinese education for the children. And as a right seller, we do literatures as our we do if you know Cao Wenxuan, who is a very famous writer in China, and he got the Hans Christian Andersen Award. He has wrote many stories for Chinese children, about the Chinese children's life in different cities and different background. So I also want to know if you like this kind of literature books from about Chinese children, something like this, because we do some of. Okay, sorry, like this. Thank you.
Sorry, Ciccy. I'm keeping you to your 5 minutes, but I have one very quick question, and that is,
okay,
the science books that you are publishing, are they for the Chinese curriculum or are they for trade channels? So they're sold in bookshops for parents to buy for out of classroom teaching?
We both do, but I mostly do for the market, not for the curriculum, school curriculum. Yeah, but we also do books for school.
Yeah,
especially for school we do.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, we have to move on to our next person, but we can come back to you a bit later.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, we have Francois Von Herter, who is the publisher and co-founder of Bitter Lemon Press. Francois is Swiss, lives in the UK, and is joining us today from Greece. So Francois, over to you.
Thank you. I'm a little bit worried about our connection because I am in the very north of Greece on the Albanian border, and the internet isn't great, but I'll struggle along. And there was I guess a bit of a misunderstanding. I thought I was to prepare a minute and a half and then have sort of a Q&A, but I will, I'll go ahead and see how much of the 5 minutes I take. But basically talking about the UK in general, one has to say the market for translated fiction is buoyant. It isn't the old saw about only 2% of the books in the UK or the US for that matter are from translation. I think that has been changed in the last few years, influenced by obviously people like Elena Ferrante or Knausgaard or Stieg Larsson. The market seems to be more open and more receptive. There's still a bit of a bias of people saying if it's a translation and a translated name, it's a bit esoteric and perhaps a bit elitist. So we have to overcome that. But I think we're well on our way, and people from across the world should feel courageous about offering rights to people based in the UK and elsewhere. Now, what works and what are sort of a couple of practical points I'd like to share with people? I guess the first thing is, because we're very much oriented on crime and noir fiction, some of these points are related to that, but they might be applicable to general literature as well. So the first point is, I think the Anglo-Saxon world is focused on character-driven books in series where possible, so that you're allowed to build up an author's name and ideally the character's name. I mean, when you look at things that have really worked, the ultimate mark of success is not knowing who the author is, but who the hero is. So it would be Lisbeth Salander and not even Stieg Larsson, or Montalbano, written by Camilleri, or Maigret, a very obvious example, written by Simenon. You know you've arrived when people know the name of your character. Obviously a silly but otherwise example is the James Bond books. But now everybody's only focused on the films, of course. But it's the character name that you want to build up as the brand, and certainly not the publisher's name, but the author as well. Then, to stay practical, I think books that work in the Anglo-Saxon world and over here are, things you'd like to see are about 300 pages long. I think if it's a lot shorter than that, people will say there's not enough substance. If it's much longer than that, it's frightening for publishers over here because of the translation costs. So you have to find some sort of middle ground, and around 300 pages, it sounds simplistic, is the way to go. The third point is providing translations, doing translations on spec to try and to convince people to buy the rights. I would say that's a very tricky thing to do and not always a good thing to do. What's happened often is the publisher in the UK is provided with a rather useless translation by someone who doesn't have the proper recognition. And it's extremely time consuming to fix that. And one would be better off starting from scratch. So I think the old means of doing this, providing a sample, providing a very good synopsis, is probably better than commissioning a translation by someone who may not do such a good job. The fourth point, I guess, is subjects. This may not be that original around the world. I think what's hot or what works is domestic abuse, child traffic, violence against women, and this continuous emphasis on misery memoirs, which influence the noir and the crime fiction as well. They're sort of those. And then I guess we've had a bit of a respite. We had a long time where backcountry crime was interesting, things taking place in remote farmhouses. I think gratefully for me, I think we seem to be coming back to urban crime, which seems more relevant and interesting if you want to find out about the society where the book takes place. Another thing that I think that everyone's a bit tired of is the serial killer. I think enough already. Absolute evil is less interesting than more ambiguous evil. And another trope that I think we can do away with is where the reveal of the book goes back to World War II and some horror that took place there. I think people are a bit tired of that too. Then there's geography. I guess that's a point. What works, what doesn't work. I think the market is agnostic by and large. Many different things are of appeal. Scandi noir continues to be very strong, but a bit of Scandi fatigue seems to be setting in. There was a time when everybody said we have to publish books that take place where people go on holiday. I think that rule we can throw out. People are curious about exotic places, about exotic societies, not necessarily where they're going to sit on a beach any longer. And so that you see more and more books taking place in the banlieues of Paris, in the sort of underworld of Marseille, the seamy side of Helsinki, or even Montevideo. Really what's important is teaching people or allowing people to learn about interesting societies, about how crime takes place in those societies and what it teaches you about local corruption, local politics, local police work. And then if I had to pick out if there's going to be, or there is already a new Scandinavia, I think Japan is taking its place, and people are fascinated by Japan and the crime worlds of Japan, and the quality of the literature is absolutely astounding that's coming out there. It's sometimes hard to negotiate rights. Things take longer, but I will end with Japan.
Thank you, Francois. You summed that up beautifully, and I think we could have listened to you as well for another hour on your own. So thank you so much. That was fabulous. So we are now going to, not very far geographically from you in Greece, actually, to Banu Ünal, who is the Vice General Manager of Günışığı Kitaplığı. I hope I've said that okay, Banu. And they are a leading publisher in Turkey of children's and young adult books. So Banu, over to you. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm representing a publishing house, as Emma told, who is specialized only in contemporary children's and young adult literature. Therefore, today I will speak for this specific field of activity. Actually, the right buyer's wheels or selection criteria shall be reviewed in two main groups. First group covers the content-related criteria, whereas second group covers business-related contractual criteria. The content-related criteria are, of course, essential to have at the first place, whereas the contractual criteria are more supportive. What do I mean with content-related criteria? First of all, the story itself and the telling style of the author. We all know that an interesting story, which is beautifully told, generally sells everywhere in the world. So the book's performance in its original language and the number of countries to which the rights are sold is a basic indicator for us. Second comes the availability of skilled literary translators from the original language. Again, we all know that the language of translator is very important for successfully reflecting the narration style of the author. We always prefer to translate the books from their original languages. Therefore, the translator must be very competent in literary translations from the source language to target language. For example, Turkish-speaking Danish literature translators are very hard to find, which is a factor that keeps us distant to Danish literature. Then comes the theme selections. We like to publish stories with universal themes that are against all kinds of discrimination, like religion, ethnicity, gender, and in a smaller scale, even the family roles. Furthermore, this theme shall be valid for our own society, so the young readers shall be experiencing or at least observing similar things in their lives as well. For example, a story about discrimination against Black people is not of too much interest to us because in our society there is no such discrimination. Whereas a story about discrimination against autistic people is attractive as we experience such discrimination here in Turkey, and we like to give messages to child readers and set good examples for them through literature. Then comes the criteria of cultural conformance. As you may all know, in children's and young adult field, those who select the books and those who read them are different. Either the parents or teachers select the books and suggest them to children, and these grown-ups are generally very sensitive, sometimes oversensitive about details which they believe may set wrong examples for the kids, like smoking, drinking alcohol, nudity, vulgar language, etc. Also, the dose of violence or anxiety in the story is very important for these overprotective adults. Some details in the story or even in the illustrations which are not valid for our culture, like religious symbols or celebrations, are to be avoided as well. Then comes the level of unfamiliar details. Actually, we as Turkish people like to follow the world very closely and learn about different cultures. However, when it comes to children's literature, there shouldn't be too many words, concepts, or names in the text which the child readers are not familiar with. Now comes the second group, which covers the business-related contractual criteria. First of all, we like to have a contract period of minimum 5 years. Especially in children's literature books, the driving force to increase the sales is making bulk sales to schools. And it takes more than a year, sometimes 2 years, to make a title to be included in school lists. Children's and young adult market in Turkey is a long sellers market rather than a bestsellers market. The contract period shall allow us minimum 18 months time to translate and publish the title. Especially in recent 2 years with the pandemic, the frequency of publishing new titles have dropped further. The royalties and payment terms are subject to negotiation for sure. However, while negotiating the royalty percentage, the right seller shall keep in mind that the additional royalty paid for the translator is an additional cost factor for us. Also, the required payment terms shall be in accordance with the prevailing collection periods in our country, which is 6 to 8 months. We need to have flexibility in making changes on the cover image in the illustrations and design of the book, especially book designs which need special papers and production styles may be too costly for us. In Turkey, the book papers and quality paper is imported. Due to continuous devaluation of Turkish lira against foreign currencies, we need to keep the production costs under control. For this very same reason, the contract renewal advances shall be kept at reasonable levels as well. So I'm finishing here.
Thank you, Banu. That was fascinating. Really good to know what works and what actually, importantly, doesn't work in a market. So thank you. We now come home to the home territory of Germany, and we're joined by Thomas Tebbe, Editorial Director for Literary Fiction for Piper Verlag. Thomas, please do tell us about the current state of affairs for translated books in Germany and what is working and what the trends are for you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I was a little overwhelmed by the subject that you are stating, what rights buyers want. I could begin by saying it depends, or it is difficult, or it changes all the time. In any case, it's very hard to generalize. I could be very specific and just tell you the things that I personally like, and I'll try and find a way through these things. I want to tell you about 3 things: Germany in general, commercial fiction as opposed to literary fiction, which is a big difference. And finally, then specifically the field I'm working in, namely literary fiction. So let's first have a look at Germany as a market for translated fiction. It's huge, and it has always been huge for decades, I would say. And the network and the communication between Germany and all the markets I can think of is really strong and sustainable. So we buy a lot and have always been buying a lot. There's a couple of reasons why the numbers in translated fiction titles is going down a bit. I could name 4. One is that the German agenting system is getting more and more professional, and we now see German authors entering the market being much more specific and what people are used to from, say, UK or US, and they just replace the translated authors because they're cheaper, basically. Second would be language skills. Formerly, Germans were not able to speak English or read French or Spanish. Now we see that a lot of young people just read in the original language, and Amazon, reason number 3, provides them with copies of the books within a day. So it's not a problem to get a hold of the latest Ferrante, you just buy it online. And fourthly, and that is not to be missed, is Corona. All big houses I know of have cut their lists, and not only their list in 2020 and 21, but also the list to come in 22 and 3 and 4. We have realized that cutting the list doesn't necessarily mean you cut your turnover. You make the same money by less titles. It sounds absurd, but maybe it's because they are attended to with more diligence. They get more visible because there's less titles. So bottom line is Germany is still a strong market, but maybe we're getting more selective than we used to. So let's come to the second point, commercial as opposed to literary fiction. Commercial fiction in Germany works according to very strict rules. I'm not working in commercial fiction, but I'm a day in and day out surprised by how clearly the image is of my colleagues in commercial fiction, what they want and what they don't want. There are rules, there are genres and subgenres that are popular that need to be filled with a slot. Like, for example, crime fiction makes out 26% of our market, really big. And crime fiction then falls into several categories, all of which have to be taken care of. Historical crime, candy crime, regional crime. We have a slot for those each month. The markets we buy from are very specific. Namely, for crime, it's UK and Sweden. For romance fiction, commercial women's fiction, it's UK and Germany. So it's, as a French, it would be really difficult to get into this for several reasons. French, it stands for wellness, literature, romantic, love stories set in Paris. It sounds silly, but that's the way it is with commercial fiction. The point is, it has to be interchangeable. Then it works. They have very definite covers. They have their visuals that we work with. From time to time, something new enters the market, and then you have a new genre, but that's very rarely the case. Literary fiction works totally different. In literary fiction, you have to be original. You have to reinvent the author every time you publish him. So literary fiction, that's what I'm in charge of. Here you can say 50% of my list is translated fiction, and I'm looking for relevance. So there's 3 points. It has to be a big name. It has to be a book that has a prize, or it has to be a book that discusses issues like race, gender, political issues, sociological issues. And if you're lucky, you combine all 3 of them. Contrary to commercial fiction, we buy more in the US at the moment, that says, and Italy and France, sometimes in Spain, but Spanish literary fiction is a little trickier, as Anna knows from me. So coming to the end, it's a big market, and I think we are very open, especially after Corona. We've learned that race and gender and stuff that doesn't play a role for us normally, because our percentage of people coming from other countries to us is not as high as in the US, and yet we pay attention to this and very much like to read those issues.
Thank you, Thomas. That was very clear and very specific. And I think anyone watching who wants to enter the German market will have picked up some genuine pearls of wisdom there. Thank you very much. Last but no means least, and I hope you'll all stick around to listen to Anna, because I'm sure she's got some very interesting things to tell us about the Spanish market. So Anna's a literary agent this time at Pontas Literary and Film Agency. She represents authors from 5 continents globally, selling their translation rights everywhere, including Spain, which is the market she's going to focus on for us today. Welcome, Anna, and the floor is yours.
Hello from the Catalan countryside, not very far from Barcelona. I'll go quickly because I think that we're just running out of time. So, okay, as many of you may know, Spain is a very complex state. We publish in 4 languages here. So the Spanish language, of course, which is the biggest one, around 40 million people community. Catalan language, around 10 million people reading in Catalan, Basque and Galician, 1 million each, more or less. So when agencies and publishers selling rights within Spain come here, they have to just have in mind that there are 4 territories in one, let's say. So Spanish, Catalan, Basque and Galician. And well, I must say that books published in Spanish language within Spain are mainly sold 50% in Catalonia, which means that then there's a competition between books translated from any language into Spanish and from any language into Catalan when they just are launched. So this is why now it's more tricky than ever. Publication date and price have to really be coordinated between Spanish language publishers and Catalan language publishers. They have to really be out at the same day, at the same price, and promotion have to be done at the same time. So this is something that is more and more tricky and interesting too. I'm not speaking about Latin America, Spanish language in Latin America. This is a completely different world and experience. However, I just would say that during the pandemic and a little bit before, but now more than ever, local printing of Spanish language books in each country, it's mandatory now. So exports are less and less done from Spain to Latin America. Okay, what publishers are looking for in Spain now in translation? So I would say that big names, big prices, big international prices, big bestsellers, more than ever. There's less room for known authors in any language, unfortunately. So of course there's an interest, and there's an interest in diversity, an interest in authors from all over the world, especially in literary fiction, but there's less room because, as many of you have said before, publishers are reducing the number of titles published per year, and probably this is going to stay. Personally, I think this is a good thing, as also Thomas said, because there's much more attention for each title. So promotions here in Spain are done with much more care, probably, and especially digital promotion. So when authors are anywhere in the world, but the promotion can just go on and on digitally, and it's very interesting. And so this is a trend that I think is going to stay. But it's true, there's less room for unknown authors, there's less room for discoveries in translation, and more room than ever for big names and big prices. And this means that there's no middle list now anymore, we would say. So some titles sell a lot, normally the big names, and some discoveries or like new debut authors, they sell nothing. So there's no in between, really. And this is something that is really something that's happening here. The new trend is nonfiction. This is what I would say. All sorts of nonfiction in translation, from current affairs to narrative nonfiction. This is really what people want to read more and more, coming from any language in the world, any place in the world. This is really going up. And then the backlist. So many Spanish publishers in any language, Basque, Catalan, Spanish or Galician, have gone to the backlist. They have just changed the cover, sometimes even just, refresh the whole title even. And there's a new, discovery of books that they were already published. So they are not acquiring rights because they already had the rights, but they just refreshing the whole thing in terms of marketing, and they're just putting them in the bookstores. And yeah, more or less, this is like a wrapping up. I know that we are late, so maybe I'll stop here.
That's fine. Thank you, Anna. And one question that's come up, and just maybe a yes or a no, is science fiction of interest in Spain? And that came up for Germany as well.
Yeah, science fiction is, it's a genre that people like and they read a lot, and it's translated, especially coming from the US. And all sorts of fiction are translated. Yeah.
Thomas, science fiction?
Science fiction is a rather small percentage in Germany. We do have a couple of titles, and I only know of one other publishing house in Germany, so it's really small.
Great, thank you. And Banu's put a note in the chat about Turkey as well, about non-fiction and graphic novels. Thank you for that. So our time is up. Hannah has come to close us off for the afternoon, but thank you to our 5 fantastic speakers. Their insights and knowledge has been fantastic. I hope everybody goes away with a couple of nuggets of wisdom there. So thank you, and thank you, Hannah and the Frankfurt Book Fair, for hosting us.